Hey guys, so today I wanted to talk about authenticity. And to be honest with you, I feel really stupid having a big red flower in my hair, but it kind of fits into the story later in this video as I reveal perhaps maybe how insane I am. So stick around if you dare. So authenticity is a really important topic in personal development, and then it deepens in spirituality. And you start to sense that some people have this kind of confidence and authenticity that's unshakable, that you really resonate with and want. And this is almost how we create our gurus and how we create our idols. And that's something I really want to talk about later. But first, authenticity. So we all out of suffering versus love, and out of the feeling of that inherent separation, we create so many ideas and so many complications, so many dualities, so many distinctions to hold ourselves to a standard. And so one of these is authenticity, the duality between authenticity and inauthenticity. And you only know by feeling whether you're being authentic or inauthentic, because truly when you come down to it, there's no duality and there's no self you can judge, who you can hold the standard to. And so we often are sensitive when people come off as being inauthentic. And as you become more in touch with your own source, so to speak, in touch with your own feeling, within your own guidance system, you might notice when you see other people that they're inauthentic. But really what we're sensing there is some suffering. And going back to one of my past videos, that suffering is a projection. So it's our own fear of being inauthentic that we're projecting on someone who's struggling through a presentation and can't remember what they wanted to say, or someone who copies somebody's artwork. So I've been a part of like the arts and crafts world for most of my life. That's something I love to do, and that's what my business is centered around. And so copying was a really important issue to us. And it was also by some of the more like accepting people. They understood that when somebody started out, they had to kind of have an ideal to hold themselves to. They had to have someone more well practiced than they were, to kind of hold as inspiration, as an example of what their work could really be. And so it was really the inspiration behind that. And then when you're starting out, you don't really know what to do. You don't really have a concept or a basis to have these kind of creative ideas of how you can make your own authentic work your own. And so you end up kind of copying what you've seen. And this is kind of a natural thing. And so when we see this in other people, and when we see this in spiritual seekers, we often really dislike it. And how this comes out in spirituality is often positive thinking. When someone's trying really, really hard to be positive, but you can kind of sense behind that they don't really believe what they're saying, their words. They're kind of hoping that by acting positive and by only like saying the positive things, that they're going to be able to in the future somehow feel that. Well, love is now. And again, that suffering is a projection. And so I spent most of my entire life in trying really hard to be authentic and really just appreciating the truth and thinking the truth was the ultimate value to live up to. And the older I got, the more that evolved kind of into being negative, quite negative a lot. And so I thought when I was saying negative things about people that I was seeing the truth. And I kind of deceived myself, because the fundamental imagination of myself and these standards I was holding people to gave me this sense of right and wrong, this sense of of truth and false, the sense of authentic and inauthentic. And so one of the funniest ways this played out is I thought that the things that I was drawn to, or the things that I define myself with were define me. And so one of the things I pushed against the most was I grew up in this area where everybody loved country music because it was a rural area. And I thought that my musical tastes were more refined than that. And so I hated country music and I really pushed against it. I hated it. I honestly hated listening to it. And most people completely understand exactly why, exactly what I'm talking about. And so for years, I hated it. And when I went to high school, I had a really long bus ride, and the bus driver listened to nothing but country music. And so I'd bring my CD player, but sometimes, you know, back in the day, the batteries would run out. We didn't have MP3 players or iPods we could just charge up. And so my CD players would break from frequent use and being tossed around in my backpack. And I'd run out of batteries. So I ended up listening to a lot of country music. And by like hours, 2 hours every day, if I didn't have anything else with me. And so by my senior year, I started hearing a couple old country songs and I started appreciating them and being interested in them. And I just kind of like let that anger and that resistance go. It's just, I'd done it for 3 years and that was just enough. And shortly after that, I started appreciating all country music. And for like a year of my life, I listened to that over anything else. I just embodied country music for a year of my life. And it was just shocking to me that what I inherently liked could be conditioned completely out of me. And so it's so interesting how we see ourselves drawn to certain things. We see ourselves drawn to certain teachers. We see ourselves drawn to certain types of entertainment, types of music, and we don't really know why. And a lot of it is conditioning. A lot of it is based on nothing. But at the same time, this is something that's to be honored too. And it's like, this is a continual theme that just keeps coming up. And my life recently has just felt almost like paradise, because I just see, and like I hesitate to say that, and yet I know that there's nothing to fear, that it's all this projection. It's like, oh, life is, like I said in another video, it's like that knock on wood kind of thing. Everything just goes so well. Because you just aren't concerned about it not going so well. And so it's really like there's no flip side. There just can't be any flip side. Like if nothing can be known, then leaving the house, like this neurotic thing I'd leave the house and I'd be like, oh, maybe I left something on and the house is gonna burn down. And then once you've just sort of accepted that life is complete, utter chaos and this is all just this interesting story unfolding, it's like, okay, like that's not even, it's not a neurotic concern anymore. It's not that there's somebody who's taking responsibility, but there's not somebody who feels responsible anymore. And so that's a big difference. Like you can't feel responsible for being authentic. It's just something that happens. And so when the person who feels responsible gets out of the way, that's just what happens. So one of the other things that happened with me trying to continually be this authentic spiritual person is that I kept shutting down little things, little like fun, whimsical things that I thought would be fun, and also kind of judging other people for wasting their time doing that, because I had this like idea of what life should be. And so as I started getting into the law of attraction and started understanding how that focusing on the positive and focusing like on what you want and what inspires you, how important that was, the reality of it started to completely fall apart. And so there are a few videos I made last year. So if you've been following me since last year, maybe you saw them. And they are when the imagination, reality, duality really fell apart for me in awakening. And the way this happened was very like storybook kind of flair. And so I've always loved stories and loved novels and loved certain things. And so since this has happened and like watching my own psyche and my own interests and my own things I've drawn to and watching other people and what they go through, I kind of have this analogy that awakening is for you. It's like it's a personal story. And so the things that you need to follow to lead you there, and your life purpose and awakening is kind of like tied together, but not. It's kind of a confusing thing to explain. Where was I going with that? But yeah, so it's like this is here to entertain you. So you're imagining this. So you're imagining your awakening is going to be like the movie that you would want to sit down and watch most. So I notice for a lot of men that it's like this action film where there's this hero and there's tons of things at risk and he goes through a ton of suffering and he's like tattered and covered in blood at the end. And he's almost blown up to smithereens a few times. And so I always thought that girls were more dramatic than boys, but I think we're just dramatic in different ways. And so for me, awakening had a very like romantic flair and very like also more of a rom-com, because I also like funny things a lot too. And when you realize that none of this is really real and yet you thought it was for so long, it is really very funny. So you can't get away from that. But there are it seems very real. It seems very profound. And without that, it couldn't be funny either. So, all the heights and all the spectrum of emotions all depends. Emotions are like a spectrum, like colors from the rainbow. So it's all the same light. It's all the same love. And so when we feel the absence of the love, that's the delusion. That's the real delusion right there. Suffering is the real delusion. And so it's amazing the things you can imagine and the things that really happen and the things that can break your reality. So at the time when I had my awakening and when I realized that I wasn't and that I was creating my own reality, I was working with somebody and he had this very like strict, very to the point kind of thing. And so I felt as if he wasn't like embodying and enjoying his life very much. So I used this analogy with him and I said, you're like a boy who gets an Easter bunny and he just wants to keep the Easter bunny completely perfect. He thinks it would be mean if he ate the Easter bunny and enjoyed the chocolate. And so you're like a boy who won't eat his Easter bunny. And so I felt like that was the way he was coming across with spirituality. And so he was the one who was helping me. And so as we were conversing and everything, I had this deep intuition and things started getting odd. And I had this deep intuition to check out this library box. And when I opened it, there was a half-eaten Easter bunny. And there was also a book that said, you create your reality. And that at the time just blew my mind completely. And there was, the other storyline that ran through the time that I awakened was months before I walked past the grave of a clairvoyant healer and noticed that the only thing that was growing on his grave was a poison nightshade plant. And I thought that was so hysterically funny and curious and bizarre. And so I told people about it and nobody thought it was funny. Like, it really resonated with me, but nobody else got it. And so I thought that was kind of odd. And then I had this impulse later to look up his book because the interest in him was just increasing and increasing. And so I looked up his book, and I, at the time, wasn't open-minded to mystical experiences or anything, but I knew from what I had learned in enlightenment and everything that everything just fit so together, and the law of attraction fit together with exactly how his life unfolded and everything. And so during this time, I discovered where his house had been built and everything. So I find that when I tell this, most people just tune out to it because it has this deep meaning for me, but it's really hard to relate how it happened. And I know if I'm going to tell the story, I would have to tell it in like a book format because all the connections are so deeply interwoven. It's like me trying to tell you the story of a Harry Potter book within a few minutes within this video. And so that's partly why it doesn't make sense to tell it to you. But the kind of synchronicity and stuff that happened then has now just become a part of everyday life. And so I developed such a devotion and love for him. And I see this in myself. It happens with a bunch of people I've worked with and a bunch of different teachers and gurus. It's just incredible to me how much I love them. And sometimes when we see somebody devoted to a guru, we project that suffering, our own suffering on them of being kind of stuck on something. But if there weren't other people, then other people couldn't help you awaken. But because there's no other people, exactly because there's no other people can be completely key to your awakening. As long as you understand that they're not other people. So there's that saying that if you see Buddha in the road, kill him. On one level, you have to do that. You have to let go of your guru. But it's like the conditional love we have for everyday people. When you have a devotion for guru, it goes beyond that. It's something way deeper and something much harder to understand than that. And when you really, really have devotion, you see that there's nobody who has it. It's just this resonance that's happening. And so it can be kind of like a key or a gateway, this expansion of love. And when it happens with somebody who's passed away like that, and yet you see these kind of connections with them, it was a way, like for me, to have this with this clairvoyant doctor, this deep resonance. It destroyed the duality between death and life and time and all these things that I thought were separating me and defining me. So recently I had this, it just felt so good, the idea to take one of my red roses that I have growing in my garden and leave it on his grave. So I went and did that, and when I sat down and just watched this huge bumblebee, and the poison nightshade plant was all in bloom. They have the most beautiful purple flowers. And so I watched this bumblebee go and pollinate every flower while I was there. And I left the rose, and then the entire cemetery was just gorgeous and beautiful. And like the whole thing, it was just this fun break, this fun thing to do. And like I told my husband what I was doing, and to him it just sounds crazy, and we made jokes about how crazy I am. But on the way back, I had an impulse to check the free book box, and when I did, sitting on top was this Vanish with the Rose. It's so funny. It's like here and there, like you listen to Jim Newman and you read I Am That, and it's like there's no here and there is attention, and it's not real. And even like when I'm trying to explain it to you, it sounds crazy, and I'm like, it sounds crazy, but to have like that impulse come up to do it, and to find this somewhere else, and someone else donated this and left it there, and it was there, and I found it, and like you start to see these kind of creepy connections that you, as you follow things that feel good to you, you see. And so talking about connections, I'm still reading I Am That. I'm towards the end of it, but right after this happened, I read this quote from it. And it's, the outer self and the inner self are both imagined. The obsession of being an I needs another obsession with a super I to get cured, as one needs another thorn to remove a thorn, or another poison to neutralize a poison. All assertion calls for denial, but this is the first step only. The next step is to go beyond both. And so we use these stories, these fantastical stories, we use these teachers, we use these idols, we create these idols, we take these symbols, and we use them to remove the thorn, and then it's not happening, but this love, this resonance will stay, and it doesn't depend on any particular thing, and there's no risk of losing that thing, because that's when we're really wrapped up in something, it becomes a standard that we're holding ourselves to. So I also wanted to mention that I started a blog, and so I've been journaling a lot, and so a lot of the connections I've made have come out of journaling, and that's a really good way to get your thoughts in front of you visually. And so, like I said, there's no here and there, and the material world becomes one with the spiritual. Journaling is really helpful because it's like manifesting your thoughts and visually putting them in front of you. And I've talked about journaling in the past. And so sometimes I get really good insights and everything. And so the best of those I'm going to be sharing in a blog. And so I just started the blog. It just has a couple entries in there. So that's in the video description link. And I also started a Patreon. So if you feel inspired to support me, I really appreciate that. That was something that felt pretty inauthentic because I spent my entire life judging, particularly like in my Christian past. I always felt that pastors like held themselves and their livelihood to having to not being able to seek or be authentic because their livelihood depended on that. So I always kind of wanted that freedom, but I'm starting to understand how like my creative and my art life and everything is all one together. And so I had the intention to sort of move away from my business as it was anyway and kind of settle down, kind of transition to more writing and everything. So I just thought that Patreon would be a good way to transition for that. So if you feel like donating, I really appreciate it. And also if you like and share and comment, I really love to hear from you guys. Talk to you later. Love you. Bye.